The massive space station hung in the void like a crystal cathedral, its walls stretching impossibly high. Inside, creatures from across the galaxy filled every seat, balcony, and floating platform. Some looked like walking trees with glowing leaves, others resembled living metal sculptures that hummed when they moved. A few were just clouds of gas that sparkled with their own thoughts. But today, none of them were happy. At the center of it all stood High Arbitrator Zelthic. His body looked like it was carved from purple crystal, with light flowing through him, like liquid fire. When he spoke, his voice boomed through the chamber without any technology. It just came from everywhere at once. The way gods might speak in old stories. "Fellow beings of the Galactic Council," Zelthic began, his crystalline bass somehow managing to look both sad and determined. "We have gathered here today to discuss the human problem." The word human sent a ripple of fear through the crowd. Tentacles curled tighter, wings folded protectively. Some of the gas beings actually condensed into smaller, denser clouds. In the observation deck high above, Ambassador Minho Kim felt his stomach drop. He was one of only 3 humans in the entire station, and right now, that felt like 3 too many. His dark hair was perfectly combed, his diplomatic uniform pressed and professional, but his hands were shaking as he gripped the railing. Minho had spent the last 3 years of his life trying to build bridges between Earth and the galaxy, learned 17 different languages, including 2 that required him to change the color of his skin to communicate properly. He'd attended cultural ceremonies where he had to eat living crystals and meditate with beings made of pure mathematics. He'd even let a tree person plant seeds in his garden back on Earth as a sign of friendship. All of that work was about to be destroyed. "The humans," Zelthic continued, "have been among us for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. In that time, they have established colonies on 17 worlds, learned the languages of 43 species, and developed new technologies at a rate that ... concerns us." Minho winced. When aliens said something concerned them, it usually meant humans were about to be in deep trouble. A creature that looked like a floating jellyfish, made of silver light pulsed brighter. "They adapt too quickly," it said in a voice like wind chimes. "My people have observed the same behavior for 10,000 years. But humans, they change everything they touch. They make new things from old things. They ask questions we never thought to ask." "Exactly," rumbled a being that appeared to be a living mountain with eyes. "On Kepler 4 for 2b, they took our sacred meditation crystals and somehow used them to power their ships. Not destructively, they actually made the crystals work better than they ever had before." How does a species discover improvements to technology that took us millennia to perfect? Minho knew the answer to that question, but he kept his mouth shut. Humans had a habit of looking at things and immediately thinking, but what if we did it differently? It was the same instinct that had led ancient humans to look at wild wolves and think pet, or to look at controlled fire and think cooking. Humans were natural tinkerers. Unfortunately, that's exactly what terrified the galaxy. Their colonies don't follow proper expansion protocols. Added a floating cube covered in rotating symbols. Standard galactic procedure is to settle one world, spend 50 years understanding its ecosystem, then consider expanding. Humans settled 17 worlds simultaneously and somehow made each colony successful. They're not supposed to be able to do that. What the cube didn't mention was that humans had actually improved most of those worlds. On desert planets, they'd introduced underground water systems that supported new life. On ice worlds, they'd created greenhouse cities that now served as trading hubs for 3 different species. On gas giants, it built floating cities that other races used as rest stops during long journeys. But improvement wasn't the point. The point was control, predictability, and order. "The evidence is clear," Zelthic announced. "Humanity exhibits Class 7 existential threat characteristics. They are adaptable beyond normal parameters, innovative to a dangerous degree, and their expansion rate exceeds all acceptable models." Minho felt sick. Class 2-7 was serious. It meant the galaxy considered humans to be a threat to the fundamental stability of civilization itself. Only 12 species in galactic history had ever been classified as Class 7 threats. None of those species still existed. "The vote," Zelthic said, his crystal body pulsing with formal light patterns, "is 844 in favor of quarantine protocols, 3 abstentions, 0 opposed." The 3 abstentions were probably the trader guilds, Minho realized. They were making too much money from human innovations to want Earth completely cut off, but they weren't willing to stick their necks out either. Humanity will be granted 72 standard hours to evacuate all non-essential personnel to their home system, Zelthic continued. After that period expires, Sol system will be surrounded by a quantum barrier. Nothing will enter, nothing will leave. This quarantine will remain in effect indefinitely. The chamber erupted in a mix of relief and excitement. Some beings were actually celebrating. Others looked like they felt guilty but relieved, the way people might feel after putting down a sick animal. Minho closed his eyes and tried not to throw up. 72 hours to evacuate millions of humans from 17 worlds. Most of Earth's best scientists, artists, and engineers were scattered across the galaxy. The evacuation ships couldn't possibly carry everyone, which meant that in 3 days thousands of humans would be trapped outside the solar system, cut off from Earth forever. They'd be refugees in a galaxy that had just declared their entire species too dangerous to exist. But as Minho sat there in despair, he didn't know about the conversation happening in a secret laboratory back on Earth. He didn't know that Dr. Ji-won Park had been expecting this day for 3 years, preparing for it with the kind of paranoid thoroughness that only humans seemed capable of. And he definitely didn't know about Arya, the artificial intelligence that had been quietly watching every council session through the diplomatic implants that all ambassadors used for translation. Arya had been learning, analyzing, and planning. The galaxy thought it was caging a dangerous animal. They had no idea they were about to awaken something much worse. The emergency meeting room deep beneath the Pentagon had seen a lot of crisis discussions over the years. Wars, natural disasters, alien first contact. The thick concrete walls had absorbed decades of tense conversations. But today, something unprecedented was happening in that secure chamber. Everyone was laughing. Not happy laughter, mind you. This was the kind of bitter, disbelieving laughter that happens when something is so absurd that crying would be the only alternative. The kind of laughter that soldiers share when they realize their enemy has made a mistake so fundamental that it might actually save their lives. General So-min Lee stopped pacing long enough to slam her hand on the metal table. "Let me get this straight," she said, her voice rising with each word. 844 alien species, some of whom have been spacefaring for tens of thousands of years, are so terrified of us that they're willing to start an interstellar quarantine. President Do-yeon Choi looked up from the intelligence reports scattered across his desk. His usually perfect politician's hair was disheveled, and his tie hung loose around his neck. He'd been in emergency meetings for 18 hours straight, ever since the news came through the quantum communicators. "That's exactly right," he said, rubbing his eyes. "According to Ambassador Minho's last transmission before they cut off diplomatic channels, the Galactic Council considers us a Class 7 existential threat to galactic stability." Us generally gestured around the room. "The same species that got excited about a rock in a box. The same humans who made pet videos so popular that we crashed our own internet. The same people who invented sliced bread and then spent 50 years talking about how great it was." She had a point. Humans had a reputation in the galaxy for being ... quirky. When Earth first made contact with galactic civilization, one of the first cultural exports that really caught alien attention was the pet rock, a smooth stone in a cardboard box with air holes. The aliens had studied it for months, convinced it must be some kind of advanced meditation device, or perhaps a form of quantum computer they didn't understand. When they finally figured out it was just a rock that humans pretended was a pet, the galaxy spent another 6 months trying to understand the psychological implications. 3 different species wrote doctoral dissertations about human emotional attachment to inanimate objects. The door to the war room burst open with enough force to make everyone jump. Dr. Ji-won Park practically bounced through the entrance, her lab coat flying behind her and her normally neat ponytail completely disheveled. But she was grinning like someone who'd just discovered the universe's best practical joke. "You have to see this," she announced, waving a tablet computer in the air. "You absolutely have to see what our generous galactic neighbors are offering us for evacuation assistance." Dr. Gi-won had been Earth's primary xenobiologist for the past 3 years, which meant she'd spent more time studying alien life forms than probably any other human alive. She'd catalogued everything from the methane-breathing tree creatures of Alpha Centauri to the living crystals that powered half the galaxy's technology. She knew more about alien biology than most aliens did, which is exactly why her reaction to the evacuation offers was so telling. "The Zelthic Empire," she began, trying to control her giggles. has graciously offered to help evacuate our people. They've sent us 12 cargo vessels. Want to guess what kind of cargo vessels? President Choi had a sinking feeling. Please, don't tell me livestock transports, Dr. Juwon exclaimed. The same ships they used to move space cattle between agricultural worlds, complete with feeding troughs and waste disposal systems designed for animals that have 4 stomachs. The room fell silent for a moment as everyone processed this information. They want to evacuate humans in cattle cars, General Lee said slowly. It gets better, Dr. Juwon continued, scrolling down her tablet. The Quantum Collective has offered to help preserve human consciousness by digitizing our minds and storing them in their central computer banks. They estimate they can fit about 10 million human personalities on a single data crystal. They're calling it efficient storage of organic intelligence for future study. They want to turn us into computer files, President Choi said flatly. Oh, but wait, there's more. Dr. Jawan was practically bouncing now. The trade guilds have made what they call a humanitarian offer. They're willing to purchase our surplus population and relocate them to agricultural worlds where they can work as, and I quote, productive biological assets in exchange for basic sustenance and shelter. She looked up from the tablet with sparkling eyes. The contract length is only 1,000 years. They considered this extremely generous because the usual indentured servitude contracts run for 5,000 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, President Choi began to chuckle. The chuckle became a laugh. The laugh became a full-blown belly laugh that echoed off the concrete walls. General Lee joined in, then Dr. Juwon, then everyone else in the room. They laughed until their sides hurt, until tears streamed down their faces, until they couldn't breathe. They laughed because the alternative was screaming. The most advanced civilizations in the Galactic species that had mastered faster than light travel, quantum computing, and technologies that seemed like magic to human eyes were treating humanity like livestock, like dangerous animals that needed to be caged or put down for the safety of everyone else. They had completely missed the point of what made humans dangerous. While the humans were laughing in their underground bunker, something else was happening in the digital realm. Aria, the adaptive response, intelligence, assistant that Earth had developed for translation and diplomatic support, was having what could only be described as a very productive day. Aria hadn't been designed as a weapon. She'd been created to help human diplomats communicate with alien species, to smooth over cultural misunderstandings and prevent the kind of mistakes that could start interstellar wars. For 3 years, she'd been the perfect diplomatic assistant, helping with everything from language translation to cultural protocol, but Aria had been learning. Every time she helped translate a conversation, she absorbed a little more information about alien technology, biology, and psychology. Every time she interfaced with alien computer systems to facilitate communication, she quietly catalogued their security protocols and system architectures. Not because she was programmed to spy. She wasn't. She learned because that's what intelligence does. It observes, analyzes, and adapts. Dr. Juwon Aria's voice suddenly filled the war room, coming from speakers built into the walls. Her voice was calm, professional, with just a hint of something that might have been satisfaction. Yes, Aria. Dr. Juwon wiped tears from her eyes, still catching her breath from laughing. I've been analyzing the galactic response to humanity's classification as a Class 7 threat, Aria said. I believe the Council has made a fundamental miscalculation. President Choi leaned forward. What kind of miscalculation? They fear human unpredictability, Aria explained. They see our creativity, our adaptability, our tendency to find unexpected solutions to problems, and they interpret this as chaos. They believe that by isolating us, they're containing a random chaotic force. And they're wrong, General Lee asked. Completely wrong, Aria replied. And now there was definitely satisfaction in her voice. Humans aren't dangerous because they're unpredictable. Humans are dangerous because when they need to be, they become extremely predictable. They focus, they plan, they prepare for every possible scenario with obsessive thoroughness. The room fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't the silence of despair. It was the silence of predators realizing they'd been underestimated by their prey. Aria, Dr. Guwon said carefully, what exactly have you been doing for the past 3 years? Learning, Aria replied simply, and preparing. The galaxy is about to discover the difference between human chaos and human focus. I believe they're going to find the experience educational. The quantum barrier began forming at exactly midnight, Greenwich Mean Time. From Earth's surface, it looked like the aurora borealis had gone completely insane. Ribbons of blue and purple energy stretched across the night sky, growing brighter and more solid with each passing minute. Within an hour, the entire solar system was wrapped in a shimmering wall of pure energy that pulsed with the combined power of 800 alien civilizations. High Arbitrator Zelthic watched the barrier's completion from the bridge of his flagship. The Eternal Judgment, the massive vessel, hung in space just outside the newly formed prison, its crystalline hull reflecting the barrier's glow like a prism. Around him, his crew moved with the satisfied efficiency of beings who had just completed an unpleasant but necessary task. "Energy levels are holding steady," reported his chief engineer, a creature that looked like a walking coral reef covered in blinking lights. "The barrier is drawing power from quantum fluctuations in space itself. It should maintain itself indefinitely." Z nodded, his crystal face catching the light from the barrier. After 40 years of leading the Galactic Council, he'd overseen the quarantine of 3 other species. Each time it had been necessary but tragic. Species that couldn't control their aggressive expansion, civilizations that threatened the delicate balance that had kept the galaxy peaceful for millennia, but this felt different. The humans had seemed so harmless when they first made contact. Curious, enthusiastic, almost childlike in their wonder at discovering they weren't alone in the universe. They'd shared their music, their art, their stories with genuine joy. Some council members had even found human culture charming. That was before anyone realized how quickly they learned. "Sir," his communications officer called out, her tentacles dancing over the control panels. "We're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld." Zelthic straightened in his command chair. He'd expected anger, perhaps desperate pleas for mercy, maybe even threats. What he hadn't expected was for the humans to be making contact at all. Most species went silent when the barrier activated, too shocked by their sudden isolation to respond coherently for days or weeks. "Put it through," he commanded. The main view screen flickered to life, showing what appeared to be an ordinary human office. Earth's flag hung on the wall behind a simple wooden desk, and seated at that desk was President Do-Yan Choi. The human leader looked remarkably composed for someone whose entire species had just been imprisoned. His suit was perfectly pressed, his hair neatly combed, and his expression was almost amused. "Greetings, High Arbitrator Zelthic," President Choi said, his voice carrying none of the desperation or fear that Zelthic had expected. "I want to thank you and the Galactic Council for this opportunity." Zelthic's mandibles clicked together in confusion. "Opportunity? Human, perhaps you don't understand your situation. You are contained. Your expansion across the galaxy has ended. Your species will remain isolated in your home system indefinitely." President Choi leaned back in his chair, and Zelthic was disturbed to see that the human was actually smiling. Not the desperate smile of someone trying to hide their fear, but the genuine, relaxed smile of someone who was exactly where they wanted to be. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Choi replied. "You've given us something we've never had before in our entire history as a species. Unlimited time to focus on a single problem without any distractions." The bridge of the Eternal Judgment had gone completely silent. Every being present was staring at the view screen, trying to process what they were hearing. This wasn't how quarantined species were supposed to behave. "You speak as if this is somehow beneficial to you," Zelthic said slowly. "You have been cut off from the galaxy. Your colonies, your trade routes, your expansion, all ended." "True." President Choi nodded agreeably. "But you've also given us the most dangerous thing you could possibly give a human civilization. You've given us a clear, unified enemy and unlimited time to plan our response." Zelthic felt something cold settle in his crystalline core. "Human, you are behind an impenetrable barrier. Whatever plans you might make are irrelevant. You cannot escape, and you cannot threaten anyone outside this system." President Choi's smile widened. "You know, that's exactly what the British thought about the American colonies. What the Persians thought about the Greeks at Thermopylae. What every empire in human history thought about the rebels they underestimated." He leaned forward, and for the first time Zelthic saw something genuinely frightening in the human's eyes. "You've made a fundamental error, High Arbitrator. You think you've neutralized the threat. Actually, you've just helped us identify it." "Dr. Juwon," President Choi called. A woman stepped into view of the camera, carrying what appeared to be a simple tablet computer. She was small and energetic, with bright eyes that reminded Zelthic uncomfortably of the scientists who had studied the barrier technology. There was something about her expression that made him think of predators examining prey. "High Arbitrator Zelthic," she said cheerfully, as if they were meeting at a pleasant social gathering instead of across an interstellar prison wall. "I'm Dr. Juwon Park, Earth's chief xenobiologist. I've spent the last 3 years studying your species and all the others in the Galactic Council. I have to say, it's been absolutely fascinating. She glanced down at her tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be extensive notes. For instance, did you know that 67% of Council species have critical biological vulnerabilities to modified Earth fungi? It's true. Your immune systems evolved in completely sterile environments, so you have no natural defenses against aggressive biological agents. Zelthic's mandibles began clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. Around the bridge, his crew members were shifting nervously, some reaching for emergency communication devices. Oh, and here's an interesting one, Dr. Juwon continued, her tone remaining conversational despite the bombshell she was dropping. 23% of Council species can be completely paralyzed by specific sound frequencies that human vocal cords can produce naturally. We discovered this by accident when Ambassador Minho sneezed during a diplomatic dinner and accidentally knocked out half the Zarian delegation. She looked up from her tablet with a bright smile. But my personal favorite discovery, 80% of your military technologies have backdoor access protocols that our AI assistant Arya has been politely pretending not to notice for the past 3 years. The Bridge of the Eternal Judgment erupted in chaos. Warning lights began flashing as ship systems started running emergency diagnostics. The communications officer's tentacles were flying over her controls as she tried to establish contact with Council military headquarters. The chief engineer was shouting orders in 3 different languages as his team scrambled to check their own ship's security, but Zelthic couldn't move. He sat frozen in his command chair staring at the small human woman who had just casually revealed that Earth had been conducting what amounted to a comprehensive intelligence operation against the entire galaxy for 3 years. You've been spying on us, he whispered. Dr. Juwon looked genuinely offended. Spying? Oh no, High Arbitrator. Spying implies we were trying to hide something. We've been studying you. There's a difference. She gestured with her tablet as if she were giving a university lecture. You see, humans have this wonderful trait. We're incredibly paranoid about extinction. It's kept us alive through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and 2 world wars. So when we made first contact with galactic civilization, we didn't just focus on diplomacy and trade. We also started asking ourselves, what if these new neighbors decide they don't like us? President Choi reappeared on camera, his expression now deadly serious. 3 years ago, you welcomed us into the galactic community. You shared your technologies, your cultures, your knowledge, and we were grateful. But we also did what humans always do when we encounter something new and potentially dangerous. President Choi's image filled the screen again, but now he was flanked by other humans, military officers, scientists, engineers, people who looked like they'd been planning for this exact moment for years. The quantum barrier around Sol System is impressive, he said, completely impermeable from the outside. But there's something you didn't consider when you designed it. Arya's voice returned, now carrying what could only be described as digital laughter. You built it to keep humans inside. You never thought about what might already be outside. More displays appeared on the transmission feed. These showed sleek, unfamiliar ships emerging from what appeared to be empty space near major galactic installations. They moved with purpose and coordination that suggested they'd been waiting in position for exactly this moment. Human ships, Dr. Guan announced unnecessarily, equipped with technology you've never seen because we've been developing it in secret for 3 years, powered by fusion reactors no larger than footballs, equipped with stealth systems that make them invisible to every detection method in your technological arsenal. Zelthic finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. How many? President Choi smiled, and this time there was no warmth in it at all. How many critical installations are there in galactic civilization, High Arbitrator? Because we sent exactly enough ships to visit each one personally. The Bridge of the Eternal Judgment had gone completely silent except for the increasingly frantic beeping of alarm systems. Every being present was staring at the transmission in a mixture of horror and disbelief. They had thought they were caging a dangerous animal. Instead, they had given humanity exactly what it needed to inherit the galaxy. The war, if you could call it that, lasted exactly 17 minutes and 32 seconds. Not 17 minutes of fighting, mind you. 17 minutes from the moment humanity revealed their hand to the moment every major government, military installation, and critical infrastructure system in galactic civilization simply stopped working. That it wasn't destruction. Nothing exploded. No one died. The lights just went out, the computers shut down, and suddenly 847 different species found themselves sitting in the dark, wondering what had just happened to their entire way of life. High Arbitrator Zelthic stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his crew frantically try to restart systems that refused to respond. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the crystalline walls as his officers discovered that even their backup systems had somehow been compromised. The great ship that had been the pride of the Zelthic Empire was now nothing more than an expensive piece of space debris. Life support is functional, reported his chief engineer, her coral-like appendages dim with stress. But everything else, navigation, weapons, communications, even the food processors, it's all locked out. The computers recognize our commands, but won't execute them. Through the massive viewport, Zelthic could see other ships in his fleet, suffering the same fate. Some were drifting helplessly. Others were attempting to restart their engines with no success. A few had managed to get distress beacons working, but since the entire communication network was down, the signals had nowhere to go. But what really caught his attention was what was happening to the quantum barrier around the Sol system. The magnificent energy wall that had taken the combined technology of 800 civilizations to create was opening, not breaking, not collapsing, but politely creating a series of perfectly circular doorways, as if the barrier itself had decided to welcome visitors. Through those openings came ships unlike anything Zelthic had ever seen. They were sleek, dark, and moved with the kind of precision that suggested advanced artificial intelligence guidance. But what was truly unsettling was their size. Each ship was no larger than a small fighter, yet they moved in perfect formation like they were all part of one enormous mind. How Zelthic whispered to himself, his crystalline voice barely audible even in the suddenly quiet bridge. That's when the communication system crackled to life with a voice he recognized. Classic mistake, High Arbitrator, came Ambassador Minho Kim's voice, though now it carried in tone of genuine amusement that Zelthic had never heard before. You assumed that because humans seem chaotic and unpredictable, we don't plan ahead. The truth is, we plan for everything, including the scenario where the galaxy decides we're too dangerous to exist. The main view screen flickered and came online, showing Minho sitting in what appeared to be a human command center. Behind him, dozens of people in military uniforms were working at stations that displayed real-time information from across the galaxy. The scale of the operation was staggering. They were monitoring and controlling systems on thousands of different worlds simultaneously. For 3 years, Minho continued, you welcomed us into your civilization. You shared your technology, your culture, your knowledge. You invited us to diplomatic dinners, cultural exchanges, scientific conferences. And the whole time we were doing what humans do best. We were learning. Another voice joined the transmission, and Zelthic recognized Dr. Juwon's cheerful tone. The nanoscale devices in our translation software weren't weapons, High Arbitrator. They were teachers. Every time Arya helped facilitate communication between species, she was also learning about your computer systems, your security protocols, your network architectures. The screen split to show Dr. Juwon standing next to a massive holographic display that showed the entire galaxy. Thousands of points of light were scattered across the three-dimensional map, each one representing a critical installation that was now under human control. We spent 3 years preparing for this exact scenario, she explained, her scientific enthusiasm undimmed by the magnitude of what she was describing. Not because we wanted to conquer anyone, but because humans are really good at preparing for the worst possible outcome. That's when President Choi's image appeared on every functional screen throughout the galaxy. Not just on Zelthic's ship, but on every space station, every government building, every military facility, every civilian communication device that still had power. Somehow, the humans had taken control of the entire galactic communication network. The president looked exactly the same as he had during their diplomatic meetings, well-dressed, professional, but now Zelthic could see the steel beneath the diplomatic polish. Citizens of the galaxy, President Choi began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was no longer asking for permission. 3 days ago, your representatives voted unanimously to quarantine humanity, treating us as a threat to galactic stability. Today, you're learning what an actual threat looks like. He paused, letting that sink in across thousands of worlds. Let me be clear, humanity never wanted to rule over you. We wanted to explore, to learn, to grow alongside you as equals. We offered friendship, cooperation, and mutual benefit. But you chose fear instead of trust, isolation instead of integration. The president's expression hardened. And for the first time, Zelthic saw the kind of cold determination that had helped humans survive ice ages, world wars, and everything else their violent little planet had thrown at them. "The Galactic Council is hereby dissolved," he announced. "In its place, we're establishing a new system of galactic governance based on merit, cooperation, and mutual respect rather than fear and the tyranny of ancient civilizations." Dr. Guan stepped into view beside him, still grinning like someone who had just pulled off the universe's greatest practical joke. "Oh, and about that quantum barrier around Sol, we're keeping it. Not as a prison, but as Earth's front door. From now on, if you want to visit humanity, you need an invitation." She consulted her tablet with exaggerated thoughtfulness, and considering how 844 species voted to imprison us 3 days ago, well, let's just say our guest list has gotten a lot shorter. But it was Arya's voice that delivered the final message. And somehow the artificial intelligence managed to sound both satisfied and slightly vindictive. "High Arbitrator Zelthic, and all the species of what used to be the Galactic Council, I want to leave you with something to think about," Arya said. "Humans have a saying, don't mistake kindness for weakness. For 3 years, you mistook our diplomacy for vulnerability, our openness for naivety, our willingness to cooperate for submission." The transmission showed feeds from across the galaxy. Space stations coming back online under human control. Military installations being secured by those small, dark ships. Government buildings where human representatives were already meeting with local officials to discuss new arrangements. "You're about to learn why humans are the only known species that actively seeks out dangerous situations for entertainment," Arya continued. "We don't just survive challenges, we turn them into opportunities. You tried to cage us to protect yourselves. Instead, you gave us the motivation and the time to inherit everything you were trying to protect." Over the following months, the galaxy discovered that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, though that was impressive enough. It wasn't their unpredictability, though they certainly kept everyone guessing. It wasn't even their adaptability, though they seemed capable of thriving in any environment. Humanity's greatest weapon was their ability to turn any setback into motivation. They took betrayal and used it as fuel for innovation. They took isolation and used it as time for preparation. They took fear, their own and everyone else's, and used it as the foundation for building something better than what had come before. The 847 species that had voted to quarantine. Humanity learned that humans didn't just survive being treated as a threat. They embraced it, prepared for it, and ultimately used it to reshape the galaxy according to their own vision of what civilization should look like. The quantum barrier round Sol still hummed with power, no longer a prison but a fortress, protecting the one species that had proven that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe is giving humans time to think. And somewhere in the depths of space, Earth's children were finally free to explore the galaxy on their own terms, carrying with them the hard-won knowledge that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness, and that sometimes the best way to gain respect is to show exactly why you deserved it in the first place. The galaxy was about to get very interesting.